Welcome to the talk by Betsy Teutsch on 100 for 100, or sorry, 100 under 100, 100 tools for empowering women, global women. And she gives a comprehensive look at effective and low-cost solutions for helping women in the global South out of poverty. Most books on the subject focus on one problem and one solution, but Teutsch shares 100 successful, proven paths out of poverty in 11 different sectors in a visually striking book full of images of vibrant, strong women. The book is available in paperback, and we have a number of copies here for anybody who wants one. They're free of charge. And with that, I give you Betsy Teutsch.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be at Google. Before I launch into telling you about these tools in front of me that are both a combination of low-tech and high-tech, but they're all high impact, I wanted to just have kind of a love letter to Google and tell you how often an author of any type uses Google as search when you're trying to verify things as you go along in writing. But in my book in particular, because it was heavily photographic, there were a lot of Google features that made it possible. Really, I couldn't have done this book without Google image search. It just was phenomenal. And sometimes I would be looking for a picture that I know I'd seen, which is incredibly frustrating. I got better at keeping track of pictures that I liked, but sometimes I didn't realize that I was going to want that particular picture, and then I would have to use a million tag words and try to find it, and then Google image, and then scroll down, and there it would be. Because the book is printed, I needed very high-resolution photographs. So I really liked the tool that I could go in and specify that I was only searching for large photos. That was super helpful. And then I discovered the feature where you can click on an image and move it up to the search box, and that is super cool. You can then, it shows you a lot of different places that image appears, and then I could go through and find, sometimes it led me to places where I could find more information about the image, because a lot of times an image on a website, you can't tell where it came from. And I needed permission for all the pictures in the book. And so I had to track it down to the source, and that was really challenging. Also, the book, I was tracking 100 different tools, and I needed in 11 sectors. So I had all these Google spreadsheets, and I could color code everything and figure out how it all laid out just with a visual scan. But then as I added tools, it kept getting bigger and bigger, and then I couldn't maneuver until I learned about freezing rows. And I mean, this might be old hat to you, but to somebody that comes in from a different field, I was like, wow, that is so smart. I can't believe somebody thought of that. But it made the whole thing absolutely possible. So what I want to focus on today is the information communication technology section, which is 6 different tools that I included. And the first challenge of this section was, how do you subsume in ICT, which has transformed the entire world, into a 500-word essay and then 6 tools? I mean, it was hugely challenging. So I started out with the primary tool, which to me seems to be literacy in general, because ICT is not very useful if people have no reading ability. It also is challenging if the language is not their native language, but that's another question that Google is addressing through Translate, and I do use that often when I'm going to a website and it's in Spanish or Chinese or something, and I'm very grateful for that. Literacy is really the foundation, and the foundational tool in the developing world, as many of you might know, is cell phones. Does anybody remember back to when you had a cell phone like this? It was how many years ago, do you think? I would say probably more like 15. This is a Nokia 1100, and I bought this on eBay. It cost $20. Imagine that a 15-year-old cell phone has a resale value. It was the best-selling cell phone in the world. They sold about 250 million of them. And it really meets the design factors, or the factors in general, that make a tool popular in the developing world. And it really upended thinking about how to help people who are impoverished. The people that we call the bottom of the pyramid, people that live on $1 a day. There are a lot of terms for the world's poorest seventh or eighth. It's like the world's poorest billion people. So they live without infrastructure of electricity. They don't have sanitation infrastructure, no running water. And obviously, things like cell phones don't do you much good without electricity. But the proliferation of the cell phone has been phenomenal. And there was a book about 15 years ago, maybe 10, called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And it was by an economist named Prahalad, and what he was pointing out was that there are business opportunities among the world's poorest. That if you think of poor people as customers, not as charity cases, there are many ways that you can design things that people will want. And it was kind of a capitalist argument. He wasn't really a philanthropist or a do-gooder. He was just telling people that there are a lot of business opportunities. And when I look back at the book, most of them are no longer particularly relevant. And it was before the cell phone had really taken off. So it really did prove his case that if you could design something that was that met a number of criteria, it could be very successful. So the first is that it has to solve a problem that people perceive they have. One of the problems, for example, with water filtration is that in a lot of places people don't know germ theory, and they don't know that their water is causing them to be ill, and that the waterborne diseases come from pathogens in the water because you can't see them. So teaching people to how to purify water when they are unconvinced that that needs to be done is a hard sell. Getting people telephones that never had them was an easy sell. It is well designed. That's very crucial. You need things to be attractive. And there's just something about this little handheld, cute telephone that everybody loves intuitively. It also has a lot of extra features that are particularly compelling for people in the developing world. One is that when I press this button, it lights. And if I press it twice, the light stays on. And for people who were using flashlights and having to buy batteries all the time, this was incredibly convenient. And you can think of all the other functionalities that even a really basic cell phone like this has, such as texting and a calculator. Like, I've been in the developing world trying to communicate with a vendor, and we've just brought up our calculators and negotiated back and forth. Yes?
So what do people do for charging?
Well, you raise an extremely important question. There has always been an interest in getting people electricity in the developing world, and people can sometimes they siphon off electricity from a grid, but the grids are pretty unreliable to begin with. People use batteries, but they don't help very much with a cell phone because you need to plug it in. They have generators, and they can run electricity that way. But cell phones have been a huge driver of the demand for electricity. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the way that these tools are integrated. One thing brings another, and that. So the cell phone, people now are reading books on cell phones. They've gotten a little more, obviously over the years we've added more functionality. And I'm going to get back to your question. But I did want to say that we decided not to do a photographic show today, but if anybody wants to quick Google freedom241.com, you can see that there is a smartphone that just went on the market in India. This is a dumb phone. This is called a feature phone. Does anybody want to guess how much the Freedom 241 is going to cost? $4. Did you know that already? Did you design it? $4. I don't think there are any reviews out yet, but I mean, the drop in prices is amazing. And just for the record, in just background, in the developing world, you don't typically have a cell phone plan. You buy the phone, and you buy different ones. Some of them have radios. They have all different kinds of things in them. And they just keep buying them, used. This isn't made anymore, but I'm sure you can still buy them in the market. And people buy minutes. They insert a card. So the big rush to the bottom, the big price wars in the developing world are the cost of minutes, to cell phone minutes. So that also means that people don't have a reliable cell phone number at the entry level. Because once you get a new card, you get a new number. So they use cell phones very differently. And I mentioned that electricity is the next challenge. People have always wanted electricity. And lights would be the primary thing that you would want electricity for. But as I've been researching this whole field, it seems to me that cell phone charging is driving the demand for lights. So I have a bunch of different lights here. The key to cheap lighting that is improving what they have, which is kerosene lamps, which is kerosene is a fossil fuel and dirty, and it's usually subsidized by governments, kind of perversely, and the emissions are really toxic for people at home, which are primarily the women and children. This is an LED light, and because solar panels have gotten so much more efficient, this is actually the solar panel. This is what you need to charge. You leave it out during the day, and then at night you get 8 hours of light. If you need the light to extend, this is the lower wattage. If you need it, if you want it brighter, if you can, waste all your charge, you can do it that way. And also because this is marketed both in the rich world and the poor world, or the fat world and the lean world, as some people call it, there are flashers to make it useful to you to have in your car as an emergency, like if you need to flag down help. This is called the Empowered, it's the Lucy. I like that name. And here's another design. This is kind of the next level up. This is the solar charging panel. It's a little bit bigger, and it has your lower wattage and a task light. It has higher wattage and cell phone charging. So this is the kind of thing that has huge appeal to people. It's a little bit more expensive, but part of the pricing programs for these is that if you buy something like this for $10, it's around that price. And there are many, many versions of this in the developing world. You no longer have to purchase kerosene. So eventually, there's a price point at which what you didn't spend on kerosene has paid for the lamp. You need help getting over the hurdle of buying it up front, either through a loan or most likely through a loan. But even with interest, you still come out ahead. And then you have a solar lamp. You own it, and it provides 3 times the light that you previously had, and you've gotten rid of all the smoke in the house. Another thing that cell phones are driving is reading and literacy, because if you want to text, you need to know how to spell and write. And it's also driving an interest in eyeglasses. There are a huge number of people in the world that have never checked their eyes, because if you don't know that there is a simple, inexpensive correction, you wouldn't think to do that. And even the most basic readers now cost just a few dollars. They come from China. They're really cheap. There are a number of social businesses that focus on getting glasses to people. And people's productivity is hugely enhanced. The rate of the return on investment for glasses is something like 7 to 1. If a craftsman can't see what she's doing as she gets older, and then she gets readers. She's way more productive. School children, about 10% of school children need eye correction. And of course, maybe, you might have known people or been one of them that sit in the classroom and don't know what's going on because you can't actually see it. So these cute little glasses are called $1 glasses, and they were created by a physics teacher in Austria. And their idea is to get the cheap lenses from China. Most cheap things come from China. And then he created a machine, and just the raw material, which is this really light wire, and the machine, they teach people how to mechanically make the glasses on site. And you get to pick what color bead you want to kind of personalize it a little. And they are so light that they don't need iPads. So that gets you to one of the design concepts of designing things that are for the bottom of the pyramid. To make them frugal, to make them affordable, you have to engineer them in a way that is stripping down in essentials. That means that they have fewer parts that will break, fewer parts that need to be accessed to begin with, but it still needs to work. So this is a great example to me of ingenuity and frugal engineering. I'm going to pass it around if you want to see them. So these products need to be attractive. They need to be frugally engineered. They need to work. That's really essential. People in the developing world have had a lot of experience with things that don't work. So if you add warranties and you give people more confidence that if something fails, they have recourse, then the adoption rate goes way up. Because a big part of the problem is not that we don't have solutions, it's that we don't have good implementation of the solutions. So in some cases, market distribution is far more effective than trying to just give things to people. People don't particularly appreciate things that are just given to them, and if you just give people things, the designers of them are not accountable for how they're going to be used. I wanted to show you another way that literacy is expanding around the world. And this is just basically a reader. I just put up on my Facebook page, does anybody have a dead reader? Because I wanted to sample. This company is called World Reader. And World Reader has the mission of getting reading material out to school children. And they distribute a package to a school that's underwritten by, this is underwriting because it's education. You can't expect kids to pay for it. But they have their, the school teachers get to pick the content for their school. Half is in English, half is in their native language wherever they are. And the system comes with a box with all these readers and a big solar charging panel. And as you might know yourself, a Kindle or whatever kind of reader you have holds a charge for a really long time. They are stripped down intentionally for that purpose. They don't have a lot of other functions on them, so the energy goes towards bringing up the material. So a kid who never had any access to books, now she has a library that she can bring home every night with a couple hundred books in it, and they get some they can elect a couple too from the system. And I'm happy to say that my book they have uploaded it, so that's exciting. I can look on the metrics and see who's opened my book in what country and how many pages they've read, and it doesn't tell you if it had any impact. That is the trouble with statistics, but it's an amazing setup. And these are backlit. So that also gets over the hurdle of not having electric lights at home, or any lights really. So because it brings its own light. It's very, very effective. So I wanted to show you another way in which the internet and the exchange of information is impacting how ideas move around the world. Our original thought was that we are the center of the universe, and everything comes from Cambridge or MIT or, out to the world from the global north. But in fact, a lot of ideas are originating in the global south, where people have the necessity is the mother of invention. So because people need things, they figure them out. So one thing that's incredibly frustrating for anybody in any kind of a workshop is having an unreliable electrical grid. So a guy, Alfredo Moser in Argentina, had this problem, just browning out, or the lights just went off in his little factory warehouse often, and he just couldn't work. So it wasn't that he couldn't work his machines, it was that he couldn't see because there were no lights. So he figured out that if he put a hole in the ceiling, and then he put a light in, just a plastic bottle, and filled it with water. This one is not filled with water, but filled it with water and then cut a hole, stuck it up. The light refracts through the water, and it in daylight gives about the equivalent of 60 watts of light. And it does that without any electricity at all. It's just natural light. It's kind of like a light tunnel or a skylight, but the water adds to the refractory effect. So this was such a simple and great idea that it, through various websites, just kind of went around the world. So it really took off in the Philippines. And it's taken off in South Africa and many other places. It's only helpful during the day, but still, free light during the day is a lot better than sitting in the dark or with a lamp. So I call this global south to global south transmission of ideas. Some of you might like websites like Appropedia, or there are all these how to do it type websites. So if you look up a solar light bulb, you'll see dozens of different ways and directions and slides, and most of them don't rely on text. So if people in a different part of the world know how to find them, and even if they don't have good literacy, or even if they're not literate at all, it's just images. They can figure out how to make things. So the internet has been a fabulous way of spreading ideas around the world, and I'm sure will continue to be so, only more so going forward. The way that this all impacts women is women have been pretty marginalized in most patriarchal cultures, probably all, from tools and technology. And it's great to be in the Ada Lovelace Hall. I was last week at the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations, and I saw a movie that featured Ada Lovelace. It's called Code: Debugging the Gender Gap. And it's about the challenge of the absence of women in tech, not that you would know anything about that. And this is a way, the internet and all these tools, once women can get them, is a way for them to kind of circumvent the gatekeepers, the men that would sort of think that they shouldn't know this stuff or have any access. And it isn't necessarily that women think they shouldn't have access to it. It's because when you've been denied access, you think that you somehow couldn't figure it out. It's way too complicated. Only men can do this kind of thing. And when women realize and understand, and through keeping girls in school, that these are neutral tools and girls are just as good at working them as boys are, it begins to be an equalizer. I'm going to stop talking and see if anybody has questions or comments.
How were the instructions for the light sort of transferred? I mean,
well, they usually do it with a series of slides. They take pictures, and of course, that's the other great thing. Just so many cell phones now have video capacity, and I mean, not everybody is stuck at this level. That's the entry level. Slides and videos. People upload videos from all over the world. It's just amazing, and they try to break them down, and then if you go to a bigger site like Appropedia, I think they have like 200,000 pages or something like that, and people If you need a translation, you just post. You need somebody to translate it, and people will do that. So the visuals and slideshows are the most effective. And now I just discovered Google Slides. You can even use Google to do a slideshow. People use kind of the same tools everywhere. And it's just so, what I loved about this research was just seeing all the ingenious and innovative ways that people adapt ideas to their local situation. A guy in South Africa took this idea, and he thought, well, why don't we combine it with the LED charging? So he came up with a product that is called the Lighty. And they usually use a 2-liter bottle. This is just a smaller version for demo purposes. And he wrapped a solar charging panel around it so that you get free, without blocking the top light. So you get free light during the day, and then I don't know how it turns on. I don't know where the switch is, but then you get light at night as well. I presume that he has some kind of a shield or something, because you can't turn it off, unlike an electric light. You know, once it's on, it would just be on. So but people combine these tools. The last tool that I was going to tell you about was integrating a whole bunch of different tools in really cool ways. So solar panels have dropped in price, and they're more efficient. So a solar panel that used to be this big is now this big, and it used to cost that much, and now it costs this much and gives the same output. So people can have individual products like this that are solar charging, but then they have to remember to put them out every night. And if they forget, they don't have light the next day. You know, people are people. So having a solar panel that just sits there and charges is obviously going to be more effective and give you enough for many lights. And then the lights are plugged in. They're not portable lights. They're attached. And the charging and other small appliances. A tablet, people are starting to have tablets there's a $40 computer now in India. So even the poorest of the population now has a lot of devices that they have to charge. So combining microfinance, which is small lending, and cell phone, you can, in some countries, particularly Kenya is in the forefront of what we call mobile money, using your cell phone to send money, which obviates the need to have a checking account. You just have money in it's money that you send around electronically. It's kind of like Venmo, but on a massive scale. About 70% of Kenyans, rich and poor, use, it's called, M-Pesa is what it's called. So you can make a monthly or weekly payment for your solar panel. They install it. You have to just put a down payment down. Then you make regular payments via cell phone, which lowers the transaction cost enormously. Part of what makes microfinance expensive is that the loan officer goes around and picks up everybody's cash, and he or she goes by bike. I mean, you can imagine, you got to pay that person for their time. This way, it's paid for. And then after a set number of payments, it's usually a year and a half of payments that are set, then your solar panel is unlocked and you own it. And then for the rest of the life of the solar panel, which is long, can be 25. We don't even know how long they last because we haven't tested that yet. You essentially have free electricity, except for maybe having to replace the battery. So it's integrating cell phone, microfinance, mobile money, and the product, and getting it to people that need it. So some more comments or questions?
So you can get off the grid with a solar panel. What do you do? How do we deal with connectivity? I would assume that there would always be the possibility that, especially if there's a single network provider, that they would take a monopoly position and charge too much.
Well, there are a lot of people working on this problem, including Mark Zuckerberg. There's something called internet.com. They're running into a lot of resistance in India, trying to make internet kind of like a human right Wi-Fi, that you should be able to access it. What people in poor countries do is go to internet cafes. It's very cheap, and it becomes kind of a social hub. People in many places haven't gotten to cell phones. I mean, we can romanticize. There are more people in the world that have cell phones than toilets. That's true. But there are a couple of billion people that don't have toilets. So it's a little bit of a cheat to trot out that statistic, amazing as it is. A lot of people are still really relying on radio. Radio is a very effective ICT tool, and it's hyperlocal. So in places that don't yet have access to the internet, they rely on radio. I'm not sure how the connectivity works. It's different country to country. And obviously, there are a lot more networks in cities than in remote areas. But I would say that there are probably very few places on Earth that have never seen a cell phone by now. I don't know what's going to happen when they have the $4 smartphone. They have a lot of apps. They preload them with a lot of things. And what I think for end users like myself, I'm constantly confused about what's in the cloud and what's in my phone and what's coming from where. When I've gone abroad and turned off my, gone on airplane mode, I was in London and I did that, and I'm walking along and all of a sudden my phone starts pinging, like 10 texts came through because I walked through a spot that had Wi-Fi or something. We're in this sort of transitional state. I imagine eventually the globe will be, you can just get internet from anywhere, but we're not close to that.
Could you just talk a little bit about what motivated you to write this book and what you're hoping to have happen after having written such a book?
Well, what a great question. I was tremendously excited the more I learned about these really impactful, really smart, really affordable tools. And I felt like there's so much bad news out in the world. And most people, when you say that 2 billion people live on $1 to $2 a day, it's just overwhelming. It just sounds so dismal and impossible that there's anything we could do. And in fact, there are so many people working on really great things. I was just over this morning at the D Lab at MIT, and that focuses, it's a design lab, and it focuses on using our design skills to improve people's lives. I also came in from a feminist side and really wondering, who's paying attention to the women? They're kind of blocked out of the design process, out of the supply chain. They're not that active in the... a lot of women in the developing world can't make their own financial decisions. Their husbands decide what's going to be spent on them. Children can't make their own decisions. Their dads decide if they stay in school or not. So I really felt like focusing on what women were doing and how women could more own this sector or this connection of technology and what will empower them would be very important. So I went searching for images. I didn't start looking to write a book. I really just wanted to gather information about how women were engaging technology, to have good examples. And I just found the most amazing images. And I guess Pinterest isn't really a competition for you. It's just a complementary social media. But I started Pinterest boards of various things that I was finding, and eventually I just found so many great images of women really owning the tools that they were designing. A lot of them are the engineers, but a lot of them are people that are using them. And so I thought, this is a whole different narrative about women in the developing world. Usually we see them standing in line in camps, with emaciated children and looking very, they are often victimized. That's part of the narrative. But there's this vibrant developing world narrative of women that are smart and experienced and taking charge and joining women's groups and creating a whole different future for themselves and for their families. So that's how I got started on the book. And the book is a very flexible tool and could be used. I kind of imagine my reader to be somebody like myself, like a baby boomer woman with a little time and interest in sharing her better fortune with the rest of the world, but it's turning out that that's one segment. I'm working with science teachers to create a junior high and high school science curriculum. Turns out everybody's been scratching their heads about how do you get girls interested in STEM and how do you prevent that drop-off so that by the time they could even think about majoring in STEM at college that they haven't already left. And it turns out one big answer is that girls really like to know that they can do something that will help and make a difference. About more than half of engineering programs that focus on design for the developing world are female. So it's a great strategy to show boys and girls that meeting these global challenges is a way to you're not just sitting in a science class, you're sitting in a class that will help you be able to do something. So that is really exciting. And I'm also finding some traction getting to organizations that are sharing this on the ground with people that live in places where it's kind of a cookbook. They can look through and find a couple of things that seem like might really work for them that they hadn't known about. And that is very exciting to me.
I was just going to say, it looks as though your book has a focus mostly on women in rural areas. And so do you think that that by and large there aren't so many problems in the cities, or that they already have the necessary tools, or is it?
I would say that women are about equally distributed between rural areas, which we call, remote, last mile areas, and slums. The world is really trending urban. I looked in the book at what are the 20 largest cities in the world, and 19 of them are in the global south, and I had never heard of them. And what you're talking about, a city, I mean, that's just because I haven't traveled that much in the global south. But, it wasn't like Tokyo. When I grew up, everybody said Tokyo is the biggest city in the world. Well, it's not. So what these cities are, they have a core with a developed center with a modern infrastructure, and then they have enormous perimeter slums. And they call them shanty towns, favelas, a lot of different names. Depending where you live, they have different names. But South Africa's are pretty famous. And they don't have infrastructure. They don't have plumbing. They don't have running water. They don't have electricity. They don't have municipal systems, so that kids don't have public schools. They don't, so anybody that wants to access anything has to just kind of figure out how to make it up. So that has huge impacts on women as well. And in some ways, it's easier to improve women's lives in cities because it's denser population. If you want to have, say, public health interventions, it's much easier to roll them out in a city where it's not so hard. There are so many people there. You can have more impact. The challenge of really remote areas is just how do you get the information there, but how do you get the physical stuff there? The roads are really bad, and that's why when internet comes, it does give people access to things that they didn't have before. So it's interesting. I do have a large section in the book on smallholder farmers, and in the developing world, about 70% of the food is grown by women. So when you think of a developing world farmer, a woman doesn't pop up in your head. You think of a man, but that's actually, and that's because partly the men are trickling out to cities and migrants going around going to other countries where they can work, and often the women are left behind. So I would say that rural women are kind of doubly disadvantaged. They don't have exposure to new ideas. The traditions are far more constraining. And there's, patriarchal traditions. And also, there's still an incentive to have more children if you farm because you have more hands. You have more mouths to feed, but you have more people to help out. Whereas in the city, women and men alike have really adopted family planning. The family size has plunged in one generation. In Mexico, it was 5 children per mother a generation ago, and now it's 2. That's why a lot of what we're hearing about, that we don't have that many people coming from Mexico anymore. They're coming through Mexico, but they're not actually Mexican. So women in the cities are more exposed to new ideas. And one of those new ideas is education for girls and empowerment and smaller families. Thank you.